So then, we reach to this decade. The game's still being shaped by modern discourse, and we have to ask the question, can any Sonic game be considered particularly controversial? I've touched on a lot of games with mixed receptions in this series, and really it's difficult to say any game is uniquely divisive in a franchise that has more splits than it does games. Unleashed is a good contender for most divisive game in the series, though it's mostly down to modern reevaluation and the lackluster reactions to the games immediately following it. Colors has become something of a splitting point for a lot of fans, though in a sort of reverse situation to Unleashed, where it started out praised to the high heavens before being brought down over time. I suppose you could call 06 and Forces controversial, though from what I've seen, the groups that defend them beyond just there was a touch of potential there are small and mostly habitual naysayers. Sonic 1, Sonic 4, the adventure era as a whole. Like I said, this is a series where just about every entry is gonna have its own broken base section on TV tropes. It's difficult to only single one or two out. However, for my money, as someone who was already making YouTube videos when the game came out, Frontiers was a real splitting point.
I'm here, reaching far across these new frontiers. With my life, fight this fear. In my hands, I hold the ones I love. Walk forward through the cold tide. Always the new horizons.
Sonic Frontiers released November 8th, 2022 for Nintendo Switch, PS4, PS5, Xbox One, Xbox Series consoles, and PC. The first mainline game released since Sonic Forces in 2017, and the first original game period since Team Sonic Racing in 2019 and the Tokyo Olympics in 2020. Don't ask. Frontiers was effectively framed as a transitionary title, from the boost era that had been dominating the series since 2008 to something new and original, the next big phase for the franchise. It was basically to the boost era what Unleashed was to the adventure era, albeit with different parts carried over and swapped out. Of course, given it's only been about 2 years since the game's last major update, and the only mainline games released in that time have been a classic-style 2D platformer and a Bowser's Fury-style addition to a remaster, it's difficult to say if the franchise will really continue going in the direction Frontiers has laid out. After all, I'm sure Lost World's developers thought it would be the next big step for the series. The difference is I actually like Frontiers. Yeah, we'll get into the split of opinion after the development history, but for me, this is an amazing game. I put it in my Game Awards for 2022, and I still stand by that. Sonic Frontiers is a great game, and I will not be convinced otherwise. In fact, it's so good I own 3 different copies of it. Well, own, all 3 are digital, but I own them in the same way I own this YouTube channel, you know? I got it originally on Switch for portability, I bought the PC version and will probably mod it someday, and for this review, I played it on my new Series X so I could get the full 4K experience. And you know what? I don't regret any of those 3 purchases. This is a game worth buying 3 times. Look, this should not be your first indication I'm rich and bad with money. I bought a Series X. Frontiers entered the planning stages following Forces release, with Morio Kishimoto once again taking on the role of director. Lead game design was handled by Junpei Mutsu, planner for colors and lead level designer for Forces, and the script was written by the pair alongside longtime fan and Sonic comic writer Ian Flynn. If you don't recognize that name, he was the main writer for the Archie comics following Ken Pender's departure and is currently one of the lead writers for the IDW comics. He'd been trying to get involved in the games for a while apparently, but this was the first game he ended up writing for. Well, okay, technically he wrote the new animated scenes for Sonic Origins, but Frontiers was in development first. So we got a mix of new guard finally getting a chance to shine, and old hands trying to redeem recent failure. Sounds like a recipe for either a masterpiece or a disaster. And depending on who you ask, it was both! Apparently after Force's response, Sonic Team decided they needed to go in a new direction. The linear level design of the boost formula had gotten stale, there wasn't room for evolution, and it didn't give players enough freedom. Yeah, I've been saying we need less linearity since Sonic 1. Glad y'all finally caught on. Kishimoto pitched an open-world Sonic game, with him apparently going as far back as the world maps of Mario 3 for inspiration. Thus, the project went into development for the next 5 years, during which the IDW comics started. Ian Flynn moved to Canada. The first movie was released. COVID-19 was discovered. COVID-19 became a pandemic. The world went into lockdown. Sega threatened to shut down Sonic Team. Shinzo Abe was assassinated. America got really weird. Development got completely restarted. The pandemic technically ended. The early trailers got completely panned. The second movie was released. Queen Elizabeth died! So, yeah, a bit of a hectic production. The game's release in 2022 came with a decidedly mixed reception. Some critics loved it, thinking it was the best 3D Sonic in years, and with just a little bit more polish, could become something truly legendary. Others were much more negative, thinking the game was a mess that never fully came together and that bit off far more than it could chew. Granted, one of the lowest review scores for it came from a writer who, at time of writing, is currently talking about how Concord could be improved and the new Quidditch game is really good, you guys, so I'll take that with a grain of salt. I have more respect for the Jimquisition review, and she apparently enjoyed Forces more. I think I've referred to James Stephanie Sterling in a different way every single time I've mentioned her reviews. It's because I read some comment once about how she still goes by Jim Sterling in a professional capacity and not any other name, but I don't even know if that's true, so yeah. While there were definitely critics at either end of the spectrum with Frontiers, I'd say the vast majority were mixed. Again, even a lot of the most positive reviews still admitted there were issues to iron out. As for the fan response, well, the general byline most people use for the game's reception is that critics were mixed, but the fans loved it, and that's not exactly wrong, but it's not entirely right either. For one thing, at least some critics are, themselves, Sonic fans, and not all of those fan critics gave it 9 out of 10. The big thing is, like I mentioned in the Forces review, the Sonic franchise and fandom are both so big, you can't really make a general statement about every single Sonic fan. You could say every Sonic fan drinks water, and someone would come at you about how dehydration is the only true way to show your love for the series. There are a lot of different Sonic fans, and a good portion of them absolutely hated Sonic Frontiers. Hell, I think I technically bought one of them their home. Again, bad with money, and I have too much of it. Now, I'm not going to sit here and act like anyone who hates Sonic Frontiers is a fake fan or anything. Frankly, there are legitimate reasons to dislike it, and even if there weren't, who am I to judge? I currently have Sonic 1 in my bottom 5 for the ranking video. I'm not about to try and argue anyone else has bad Sonic opinions. That being said, I would make a fairly reasonable guess that if you really hate Frontiers, not just dislike, but actively hate, I could probably describe you pretty well. You're probably an old-hat Sonic fan who's been playing the game since the Mega Drive Genesis days, think almost any 3D Sonic game is a terrible idea, and consider Sonic Mania the only good game in the series released in the past decade. You still reference Shadow the Hedgehog 06 and Unleashed as if they're representative of the modern series in any substantial capacity beyond being video games featuring Sonic, and you probably think the biggest problem with the series is it trying to innovate and experiment rather than Sega higher-ups treating their creatives like shit. Oh, and you're probably more excited about Sonic Superstars than you are anything Sonic Team themselves actually led the way on in the past 20 years. Like I said, you are very valid as fans, but that doesn't mean I have to like you. Let's talk presentation. Sonic Frontiers is the first new Sonic game released for 9th generation systems, not including the Switch, which does count, goddammit. This was the first game Sonic Team made that could really take advantage of the PS5 and Series X's capabilities, and man does it show. In parts. Yeah, much as I've been choking on this game's dick, there are issues that even I have with it, and one of the most obvious is the truly unforgivable pop-in. To be fair, it's not like everything is pop-in. Global terrain and architectural structures are always loaded in for a map, and the rails either have no limited range for loading or a very high range. But platforms can and will disappear depending on how far you are from them, which can make finding certain platforming puzzles a bitch and a half, and I think the biggest problem is just the suddenness of the pop-in. Look, I love Breath of the Wild, Mario Odyssey, Tears of the Kingdom. This is known and will come up again soon enough. And all of those games have some degree of this issue as well, assets loading in while in view of the player. It's kind of just a part of this style of game. But in those, at least, there's some transition between something being there and not being there. Like, they fade in gradually. They don't just suddenly appear, like in Frontiers. Now, the pop-in is one of the most consistent criticisms of the game's presentation. However, the other is the game's style, the way the world looks. And look, I don't think there's a right or wrong answer to this one. I can understand the complaints there is definitely a style clash between Sonic's design and the super realistic overworlds. But personally, I really didn't mind that clash. If anything, I appreciate the game looking different from the super cartoony appearance of the recent entries. Again, I don't think there's one definitive opinion that everyone should have on this, but for me, this wasn't really a problem. One thought I think should be universal, though, is that this game's soundtrack is absolute fucking bliss. Tomiya Atani was the lead composer and sound director for the game, and I don't know where the fuck this series keeps finding these absolute gods of rock, but as far as I'm concerned, this is the best soundtrack in the series' history. Yes, even better than the iconic Adventure 2 and the remixes in Generation or the classic style bangers of Mania. We've got some mellow orchestral music for the overworld, absolute banger electronic tracks for the cyberspace stages, and some of the best rock songs for the boss fights and credits. I can't even go into all the incredible tracks this game brought us. Nathan Sharp's now an official singer for the Sonic series with the absolute banger One Way Dream. 1OK Rock provided the instant classic Vandalize, which is, I think, the first Sonic song with fuck in the official lyrics. Find Your Flame sounds like it should be for the final boss, but is just as awesome for the third boss fight. Undefeatable comes in with such a strong first impression. Again, there are just so many. Seriously, I don't think I've ever seen a game with this many bangers. Hell, I don't think I've seen an album with this many bangers. And I'm a musician. Look, I know the rule is typically that a Sonic game's OST is its strongest part, and yeah, that's usually true, but so many of these songs just leave me in awe. If you can listen to Breakthrough at all without your heart rate rising, I'm convinced it's because you don't have a heart. As for the voice acting, well, we have very different delivery from most of the cast compared to past entries, so different they fired Travis Willingham. No, but seriously, the voice acting in this game is incredible. Roger's performance is easily the most different of the returning cast, being significantly lower and more serious than his other times playing the character. Again, sort of like Unleashed was for Jason. Colleen's more than come into her own as Tails, and Cindy Robinson does amazing as Amy with a more naturalistic performance. I'm a bit iffy on Dave Mitchell's performance as Knuckles. I think it's good overall, but a couple reads could have probably done with another take. But hey, this was still fairly early into him doing the role, I can't fault him too much. And of course, loath as I am to praise the genocide apologist, yeah, Mike Pollock does an amazing job as Eggman once again. As for the new characters, Sage is performed by one Ryan Bartley, who does an absolutely stellar job for her first performance in the series. And then of course there's the mystery character, who I will heavily spoil later, but for now all I'll say is Cindy Robinson does a very convincing job and Mike Pollock is barely heard. As it should be. Seriously though, the game's vocal direction is great. I love the performances across the board, another definitive win for the game. So overall, pretty damn strong presentation. The game can look absolutely gorgeous, it sounds incredible, all good stuff. But the important question is, how does it play? You know, I've been saying this was the end of the boost formula, and it definitely is, but you'd be forgiven for thinking otherwise given how this game starts. Pretty much all of Sonic's moveset from Forces carries over into this game, and then some. We've got the homing attack, boost, double jump, quick step, stomp, slide, and grinding. Some changes to the controls for these, namely the homing attack being on its own button. The homing attack itself is odd. It kind of feels a bit too slow, especially in cyberspace. It's not a huge problem, but it can mess up an S rank on some of the challenges. We also have the light dash back in Sonic's arsenal, and unlike in most recent versions, you can use it for any rings in the game. Makes it a lot less situational, since now it can be used to collect just about any line of rings you find. I will say the sudden stop at the end of the dash can take some getting used to, so be careful if you're trying to keep the speed up with it. Alright, he's got returning moves, that's fine, but what new shit does he have? Well, to start, the stomp has been combined with the bounce from Adventure 2, 06, and Lost World. If you hold the button down while stomping, you'll bounce into the air higher than with a standard jump. You can only do it a couple times before slamming down with a more powerful stomp for the last time, but it can be useful to get to high places, or even some light sequence breaking. I said new shit, not well implemented old shit. Most of Sonic's new toolset are focused primarily on combat, which is also probably why the homing attack is its own button now. First up though, the questionably combat-ready, mostly puzzle-focused side loop. This is about as simple as new moves can get. Just run around while holding down a button and a line trails behind Sonic. You can draw circles on the ground to spawn rings and occasional collectibles, draw an infinity symbol to get a temporary infinite boost, circle around puzzle elements to activate them in different ways, and encircle enemies to break down their defenses and sometimes send them flying into the air. It's a very cool little tool, if a little easy to abuse. If you're patient enough to do a ton of loops in a row, you can very easily max out your rings whenever you want. And when you do have max rings, you get a special extra powerful boost, which can be very fun to get thrown around by. And that's not an exaggeration, seriously. You hit a slight incline with the power boost, you will go flying. I love it personally. As for combat, the quick step has been transformed into a dodging move with an additional parry for holding both buttons at once. In the base game, the parry is more than a little overpowered. You can hold it indefinitely, and not only will it deflect any attack and after the first big story beat give you a super strong attack to use against most enemies, but you can even use it to hover in midair. Hell, you can actually cancel the hit animation and avoid losing rings if you trigger it during the hit stun. The homing attack has also been reworked, making it closer to Shadow's attack from 06, where you can continuously attack an individual enemy that doesn't die in a single hit. And that helps build up combo, which can also apply to so many unlockable moves. Seriously, as you progress through this game, you get so many different ways to attack, it's crazy. But before we get into this game's surprising number of RPG mechanics, there are a couple other moves I forgot to mention. The drop dash has been added to Modern Sonic's moveset, and unless you do the slog of S-ranking certain environmental challenges post-update, that's the closest you're getting to the spin dash before the post-game. On certain walls, you can either climb up, hang on, or wall run, and if you hit it with a boost, you can run on the wall faster. Oh, and the rail running feels great, for me. You can even easily reverse direction for like the first time ever. Right, that's most of the control stuff covered. Let's talk about the unlock system. First off, this game has a skill tree with about a dozen moves unlockable. You can get skill points from skill pieces, basically this game's equivalent of levels and experience respectively, by defeating enemies in the main open zones. There are other ways to collect them though, such as getting lucky with Psyloops, buying them from the fishing shop, and once you unlock the air trick 9 skill points in, by waggling the left stick after hitting a sparkling launcher or boosting off the edge of something. Just about everything else on the skill tree is a combo move, new ways to beat down your enemies. We even have an auto combo toggle to activate if some of the input moves are a bit too tricky to get the hang of, but that won't improve those little stats in the bottom left, so how do we get those higher? Well, my friend, by collecting Cocoa. What are Cocoa? Well, they're technically not Chow. The Cocoa actually remind me of the Koroks from Breath of the Wild, being small little creatures you can find who effectively act as collectibles you can trade in for upgrades. Not that they're the same, the Koroks had a specific limited number to find and a pointless unlock for collecting all their seeds. The Cocoa will respawn sometime after being collected, and there's no reward for finding them all, so there's much less of the grind. If you can find the Elder Cocoa and trade them in, you can upgrade Sonic's boost speed and his ring capacity. Originally, there was a bit of a slog to upgrade them all, since you could only upgrade each by one level at a time, but thankfully an update made it so you could use all your Cocoa to upgrade one stat at once. But hang on, what about the other two stats, attack and defense? Well, you can find these red and blue seeds across the game and trade those in with the Elder's brother, the Hermit Cocoa. He'll take every seed you've collected and upgrade your attack and defense, so you do more damage with each hit and lose fewer rings when you're hit. That one's always worked in bulk, for some reason. Okay, we've been talking about the details of the gameplay, but how does it actually feel? I mean, if you go in the options, there are all these sliders to alter the physics of the game. Am I gonna have to tinker with a dozen different settings to make the game actually feel right? No, thankfully that's just for players who want to customize their personal experience. And also maybe a backup Sonic theme included in case they pulled up Force's Classic Sonic again. No, when you start a new game, you'll get a little menu to choose between two styles for your physics, action and high speed. I always play on high speed since it's the style for players familiar with Sonic and it works great. Obviously, your mileage may vary on how any game feels, especially a 3D Sonic, but for me, I think this game feels amazing to play. The controls are tight and responsive while still keeping things fluid. You can make precise jumps when you need to and move at insane speeds when you want. It all works really well in the open zones. Yeah, there are two main gameplay styles in Frontiers. The open zones are the open world gameplay that the game was mainly marketed on, and they're the bulk of the game. However, there's also Cyberspace, a selection of 30 levels based on the boost formula, which are kind of base breakers, at least among fans. The main issue is that in Cyberspace, the physics seem to be slightly altered, possibly to feel more like the previous Boost era games, and especially in 2D, yeah, it feels really funky, though for the most part, I didn't really mind this playthrough. Look, maybe it's because I came here directly from Forces, or because I've now played all the shittiest games in the series, but I really didn't hate playing the Cyberspace stages personally. It's different, yes, and not necessarily better, but I think for what these stages are, the physics here work fine. They could be better, and probably should be considering how many Boost games Sonic Team made, but it works fine enough. I mean, technically all but two of the Cyberspace stages are optional, since you can find the collectibles they give you elsewhere, and that will lead us to the level design, since the Cyberspace stages are the most traditional levels. So, Sonic Frontiers was originally planned to release for the 30th anniversary in 2021, before being delayed a year, which I certainly appreciate. We'll get into some of the more ingrained callbacks once we get to the writing, but for the most part, the Cyberspace levels are where you're going to get most of your continuity for. Cyberspace is very much based around previous entries, in more ways than one. Cyberspace is built to replicate the boost formula of colors, generations, and especially forces. And part of that replication is in the visuals. We have a total of 4 visual themes for all 30 stages. Green Hill, Chemical Plant, and Sky Sanctuary are all based on their generations incarnations, albeit now in trippy mid-air dimensions. And we have a sort of new theme based on the city levels from Adventure to Unleashed, Eternal Highway. And you know, I don't mind the retro visuals, the throwbacks, and how the levels look, but I do kind of wish we had more variety. I don't care if they're just more reused Generations ideas. I'd love to see a Crisis City theme for Cyberspace, but by the end of the game, seeing the same 4 visual themes over and over again is just boring. And it's not just the visual themes that were reused for these stages either. Yes, many of the layouts of the Cyberspace stages are taken directly from previous entries, and not just the Boost games either, although yes, most of it is from Generations and Unleashed. We actually have a fair few layouts taken directly from Adventure 2, including City Escape, Radical Highway, White Forest. It's interesting. There are some layouts that are completely unique, like 2, 3, and 4, 8, but most of them are taken from previous entries. And yeah, I should probably be angry about that. It is undeniably unoriginal, but honestly, I kind of got a kick out of it. I distinctly remember the moment I recognized 2-6 as being Skyrail and being weirdly giddy. Like, hey, I recognize that level. I was there a couple of months ago. Yeah, playing all the Sonic games in a row does weird stuff to your brain. I don't particularly recommend it. In all honesty, while I could gripe about the reused level design for Cyberspace, I'm more forgiving than I think a lot of people are about it. My philosophy is, reusing old ideas and replicating what worked is all fine as long as you supplement it with new content. And boy howdy does Frontiers have a lot new. This game is the closest we've ever gotten to an open-world 3D Sonic, with 5 different major islands to explore. They're named after Greek gods: Kronos, Ares, Chaos, Rhea, and Oranos, which I'm probably going to pronounce in 20 different ways by the end of this review. And yes, one of them is Chaos Island, and I'm not 100% sure they realized how odd that is given, chaos. Kronos is our first open zone, and it's an amazing starting world for the game, even if we only explore the southern half. Ares is a desert and mesa-themed area with canyons that are almost maze-like to navigate and tons of higher places to reach for. Chaos is the main villain of Sonic Adventure, and the island is a black and decimated pair of mountains miles up into the clouds with a volcano and icy peak acting as the main landmarks. Rhea is technically the northern half of Kronos Island, and it's mostly just a brief stop to illustrate a major story beat, but climbing the towers here is a very climactic challenge. And finally, Oranos reuses assets and ideas from Kronos since it was originally envisioned as part of that island, but it still feels different thanks to the giant field of flowers and the huge pyramid landmark, plus the significantly more dangerous enemies. And all of these have puzzles to solve, platforming obstacle courses, collectibles, and enemies, and chances to see this game at its goddamn best. Yeah, if it wasn't clear enough, I love playing this game so much. Multiple times while playing, I'd start up around 3 or 4 in the afternoon, and then look around at some point and realize it was about to be midnight. Given just how long and in-depth this game is, my notes on it are surprisingly sparse because a lot of the time I just didn't remember to write it down. I was having too much fun. But of course, this being a 3D Sonic game, we don't just have the main gameplay styles, we also have mini games to quickly cover. Okay, here's the joke you've been waiting for. Big the fucking cat! Yeah, Big makes his grand return for the first time in the main series since Heroes in 2003 with his fishing minigame in tow. It's a lot simpler than in Adventure 1, basically just the kind of fishing you'd find in Animal Crossing with different presentation. You can go fishing in exchange for these purple coins scattered across the islands, and for each fish or twig that you catch, Big will give you tokens to exchange at his shop. Here you can buy pretty much any collectible to be found, as well as the unique egg memos that give more story to Eggman. Not sure why Big the Cat has these, but considering he's basically just a hallucination anyways, I guess it's not really worth questioning. God, this game's plot sounds weird out of context. Additionally, each of the 4 main islands has mini-games to play in exchange for progress to different locations or a couple of the Chaos Emeralds. Some of these use the standard gameplay in weird ways, like herding rolling cocoa to a destination or ripping up weeds with a side loop. Others have entirely new gameplay systems, like turning statues to point lasers in the right directions or playing ancient pinball what. I enjoyed pretty much all of these, though they generally aren't as fun as the core gameplay. I did really enjoy the Ikaruga hacking minigames, if not enough to justify... Well, let's talk about boss fights. This game's bosses are the goddamn shit. I love them. Technically, we have over a dozen different bosses to be found on the islands in the form of the Guardians, and these are very interesting. Yeah, sorry, it can be a bit wonky, but I love the sense of scale, and it's a great preview of climbing the Titans. Those Titans are the primary bosses, and some of the best boss fights in the whole series. You fight them all as Supersonic, and they're maybe the best Supersonic bosses in the series. They use the same combat system as standard gameplay with parries and combos and more, but supercharged and flying. The bosses all feel insanely powerful, Sonic can do insane shit, and combined with the fucking stellar music, oh my god, these are insanely hype. Supreme, the 4th and technically final Titan, is a bit underwhelming, but only by the insane standards the other 3 set. It's still an incredible fight, up there with the final hazard from Adventure 2. It's just not as transcendental as, say, the ending of the Night fight. But then, of course, there's the true final boss of the base game, only reachable on hard mode. The end. Did someone say Kirby final boss? Yes, the Ikaruga hacking minigames were training players to fight the true big bad of the game, if not the whole series. And yeah, it's a very big shift, but it does kind of work. I would have preferred if Final Boss fought as Supersonic himself rather than as a shoot-'em-up technically controlling Supreme, but it's still very fun, brutally tricky to tackle as a Final Boss should be, and has tremendous sound design. The final phase where it becomes invincible, the music goes quiet, and it lets off its final taunts and toughest attacks. Oh, it's great. And that's the final boss. Or at least, it was back in 2022. Yes, obviously there's more gameplay to discuss, and believe me, we will. This is gonna be a long one, just strap in. But first, there's something I've been putting off for a while. The aspect that I'd argue is the main reason so many fans absolutely loved this game. Let's talk this game's story. The game starts with Eggman arriving on a mysterious island, placing a mysterious new device on a strange object, claiming his AI will help him take control of the Ancients' technology. However, after strange robots begin looking more ominous, his device sucks him into the object, apparently as part of its protective initiative. The plot proper starts with Sonic, Tails, and Amy all flying to the mysterious Starfall Islands, where the Chaos Emeralds have been drawn. However, a strange atmospheric charge causes the tornado to start crashing, and suddenly a strange hole appears in the sky, sucking the trio into a strange new dimension. After Sonic manages to escape somehow, a mysterious voice from the sky tells him to collect the emeralds, beat the Titans, and quote, tear down the walls between dimensions. Swear to God, Sega, if this is your plan to bring classic Sonic back again? Soon enough, Sonic finds Amy trapped in a strange sort of cage, and once she's released, a strange corrupted energy flows into Sonic. But it turns out, Amy is still partway outside of reality, still stuck in cyberspace. Now Sonic has to save Amy, Tails, and the prologue trapped Knuckles from cyberspace, dealing with growing corruption in his body and try not to be killed by the ominous little girl following him around and sending the Titans after him. Oh, and maybe find out who the Ancients are and why the Chaos Emeralds are now in these weird vaults. And when they aren't in the vaults, do a gay little dance to celebrate. As this game goes on, it becomes clear that the lore and continuity are very much back on the table. It turns out the Ancients were a species that looked an awful lot like Chaos, who had great control over the Chaos Emeralds. By the end game, it turns out they were an alien species chased from their home planet by a terrible force known only as the End. The Chaos Emeralds were originally from their world and drew them to maybe Earth thanks to the energy of the Master Emerald. There they began storing their minds in cyberspace in an attempt to avoid being completely destroyed should the End ever return. Of course, it did, and the species were mostly wiped out, with all that remained being their lucky charms and the memories placed inside those charms. Again, this plot is insane. There is a lot of plot to this game, even before going into the final horizon, and it's very much appreciated, but it isn't what I really love about the writing. No, what I love is just how expertly this game handles its characters. You can tell Ian Flynn has been writing this world for over a decade because every returning character is just about perfect. Amy is caring and sweet, but with some serious bite as she thinks someone is being unreasonable. Knuckles is a bit hot-headed and arrogant, but still very serious and witty with a drive to do good. Tails, my god, the way they handle Tails in this game is legit legendary. I might need a whole separate video if I wanted to explain his character arc. Even Eggman, who manages to be a legitimately intelligent and intimidating villain and a nuanced and sympathetic character with more than one dimension. And maybe the best is Sonic, who manages to take all the best parts from his previous portrayals to make a character who isn't perfect, can still make mistakes and be wrong, but is still funny, clever, kind, and above all else, determined. This game has emotional moments, the likes of which we haven't seen since Unleashed, hell, maybe even 06. And of course, we can't forget to mention the brand new fan favorite Sage, who steals the show in intimidation, mystery, charm, drama, humor, even tragedy. Oh my god, this is all incredible. I love it so much. God, can you tell I like this game? Now, I'll be honest here. As much as I love this game, it's not perfect. The endgame in particular was notably rushed, and while I enjoyed it, yeah, you can kind of tell. Supreme isn't a bad boss fight, but it is the weakest of all the bosses, which is weird given it's basically supposed to be the normal mode final boss. The end is cool, but it isn't as cool as the Titan fights, and the gameplay change isn't as fleshed out as it could be. And Arnos Island in general doesn't have as much story as I would want for the final chapter of the game. There are definitely issues with Sonic Frontiers. Or at least there were. Then in 2023, they released updates. Frontiers has received 3 major content updates over the course of 2023. The first 2 are substantial, but not super interesting to talk about here. The first, Sight, Sound, and Speed, released in March, and it featured a jukebox you could listen to in-game with collectible music scattered across every island, a photo mode because look at this game, 2 challenge modes accessible from the title menu involving racing through the cyberspace stages and fighting different enemies, and a nice new optional skin for the Coco. The second, Sonic's Birthday Bash, released in June, and included even more cosmetic options if you're interested, new songs for the jukebox based on the overworld music, action chain challenges that are a bitch for mid-ass rank that can unlock the spin dash if you do, new Coco to collect via hard platforming challenges that can extend your boost gauge, and the new Game Plus mode where you go back to the start of the game with all skills and stats from the end game. So yeah, substantial updates, not super in-depth stuff to talk about. There might have been more if I actually unlocked the spin dash, but no. However, the biggest update, the one that changed so much of the endgame, released in late September 2023. The Final Horizon. Holy shit. The Final Horizon adds a secondary version of Arnos Island, accessible via a portal called Another Story. In Another Story, Sage reveals a simulated possibility she came up with but discarded for being unrealistic. It turns out she can temporarily abate the side effects of Sonic's corruption, allowing him to keep moving and working while Tails, Knuckles, and Amy all operate on the island. So the plan is simple. The 3 members of Team Hero will go out and track down the Chaos Emeralds, now under even greater protection as the end approaches, while Sonic will track down trials put together by the pilots of the Titans, so he can use the cyber corruption to boost him to new heights. Also, hopefully, the day can be saved without any heroic sacrifice. Sort of an earn your happy ending kind of mode. And I do mean earn, because another story does not pull its punches. So let's get this out of the way quickly. Presentation, still just as incredible as in the main game. Great music, of course, beautiful landscape, some egregious pop-in, but otherwise a good looking game. Now, let's get to the good stuff. We have 3 new playable characters here, the remaining members of what I like to call Team Hero. We start off with Amy Rose, who feels completely different from her adventure in 06 outings. She and the other new characters are basically just as fast, agile, and responsive as Sonic is, albeit with their own variations on the moveset. Amy, for example, starts out with a triple jump into a glide using her fortune cards. Yes, after being almost entirely absent from the series outside of CD's manual and Sonic Origins' new animated cutscenes, Amy's tarot obsession returns in full force, being what much of her moveset is based on. This is understandably controversial with some fans, given Amy's whole deal since 96 has been her usage of the Pico Pico hammer. And they did technically give her a full moveset based on that hammer in Sonic Adventure, so it would have been possible to do the same here. There's technically a line in-game hand-waving it away as part of still being partially digitized, but it's not like that's a real thing the developers had to abide by. Honestly, if I had to guess, the devs probably figured they'd already explored most of the interesting ways to use the hammer in previous incarnations, and they wanted to freshen things up for Amy here. Personally, I don't really mind the card attack, stomp, and float. Besides, we still get the hammer in a few of her moves, we just have to unlock them. Yep, each of the new characters have their own stats and skill trees to fully upgrade all over again. Amy unlocks a card stomp, attacks by slashing her fortune cards and homing in with hearts, and a special Psy loop where she slams the ground to form a heart out of Psy loop. She can do a spinning attack that can be upgraded to go infinitely, poison enemies with her parry, and of course, spin dash. She doesn't have as strong a combat focus as Sonic does, since most of the standard enemies in the open zones are gone in another story, but I actually think it's pretty fun. Besides, with the triple jump and float, I think she's the character I have the most fun platforming as. For a character with slightly more combat focus, there's always Knuckles. Apparently when the final Horizon update launched, Knuckles' glide didn't work the way it did in the adventure games for 06, but luckily by this point it's been patched and works like a dream. He can climb the same walls Sonic can, as well as new red climbing walls, and his unlocks include his signature combo attack, a flaming stomp reminiscent of the Drill Claw, and a parry that reduces enemy defense temporarily. Hell, you can even unlock an infinite glide for use when you have max rings, which is so fun. He and Amy also have attacking boosts at max rings, with his turning him into an actual drill, and hers making her rider hammer in a ring of cards like they're a fucking mono wheel. You know, those are pretty cool boosts for max rings, but Tails gets a fucking airplane. Tails probably plays the most different of all the characters, being the only one without a homing attack of any kind. Instead, he throws wrenches from a distance and can stomp with a pile driver. He can also fly, of course, which works pretty well. I feel like he has just enough stamina to get substantial distance before losing altitude, but he doesn't have so much stamina that it breaks the game. Instead, to break the game, you need to unlock the Cyclone boost. I love flying around in this stupid Cyclone. It uses up the boost meter, so remember to use the Infinity Boost if you want to completely trivialize any and all platforming challenges the Foxboy has. Hell, if you're on the ground with it, you can even use the super strong laser that previously was exclusive to Adventure 2's battle mode. It's all fun, which is kind of what I have to say about all 3 new characters. They're fun. There's been so much hesitation ever since 06 for any of Sonic's friends to get a playable Spotlight. Having the full team playable in 3D for the first time since that game is a blast, and I think they all play great. Which is very good, because you're going to want to learn how to play them if you want to beat this update. Another story takes place entirely on Uranos Island, which is now covered in platforming challenges specifically for Amy, Knuckles, and Tails. And some of these are pretty damn tough. A couple even require the character's most expensive upgrades. Luckily, we have a ton of new Coco to find, either as rewards for those challenges or just to help boost you up. There are special Coco who grant you between 5 to 20 skill points, map Coco who work in tandem with the returning map challenges to unlock squares of the island's map, and of course the story critical Coco. Knuckles has punching bags to pummel, Tails has robotic Coco to hack into, and Amy has new variants of the Elder and Hermit, who she just finds on the ground. Also, they can find and unlock the new locations of the Chaos Emeralds and be corrupted by cyberspace themselves. Yeah, that's cool and all, but what's Sonic up to? Once you find a Chaos Emerald as each of the new playable characters, Sonic is tasked with ascending the towers that are now scattered across the island so he can overcome the trials of the Titan pilots and harness his cyber corruption into a brand new power. Oh, and if you haven't already gotten it, starting another story unlocks the Spin Dash. Neat! It's very overpowered, and I love that for us. To unlock the towers, though, we need to collect Lookout Coco, who can be found in the 9 new cyberspace stages, or just by finding them hidden underground in the overworld. Yeah, I did not beat a single one of the new cyberspace stages, and I only played 4A any at all. To be fair, they seem like fun, having new objectives to go for, new gimmicks in each, and even original layouts. But personally, I found all the lookout cocoa I could need just while exploring, and after how rough 4A was, I didn't particularly feel like 100%ing all these new stages like I did with the base game stages. I'll probably come back to these someday, they do look pretty cool, but for now I'm more interested in these towers. So, I mentioned Rhea Island earlier, briefly. Climbing towers there was a part of releasing the End from its cyber prison, and it was a decently challenging little obstacle. Here, climbing the towers is Sonic's main objective within the mode, and they all have their own special ways of climbing them. And those methods are absolutely unforgiving, holy shit. In case it wasn't clear yet, Another Story is a significant difficulty spike compared to the base game. It's not as noticeable as the other characters, just some more challenging platforming tasks and having to build up your stats all over again. Hell, that last one is a little easier since the slot machine starfalls from the base game have been replaced with ones that give you absurd amounts of seeds and cocoa, rather than lucking into purple coins to wander through big. With Sonic though, we have 5 very brutal platforming challenges to get to the tops of these towers, with each requiring near mastery of Sonic's physics and controls. And if you fall off, you better hope you only land earlier in the climb, because there's a very good chance you'll end up right back at the beginning and have to do everything over again. It's obviously easier on easy mode apparently, but personally I did everything in the open zones on hard mode because, like I said in the Forces review, Mama didn't raise no pussy, even though she totally did. Note how I said everything in the open zones was on hard, not a flat everything. Because there are a couple challenges in this game where I just couldn't. Once you ascend the towers, you get combat trials led by each type pilot, and the first is pretty challenging, having to beat 5 super fast and aggressive enemies with level 1 stats across the board and a 3-minute time limit, but otherwise, most of the trials are decently easy. Just remember that the Psyloop method of taking out the shells is non-optimal and that wolves can be parried whenever you want. Then there's the 5th and final trial given by the Master King, and here's a recommendation: unless you're deliberately trying to torture yourself, before you start the Master King's trial, change your game's difficulty to easy. It's a boss rush of the first 3 titans, with the only parry on offer being a limited time perfect parry, and already, this is brutal. See, in the current version of the game, if you're playing on hard mode, the parry will be active for only 16 frames, or about a quarter of a second. On normal, it's 24 frames or 2/5 of a second, and on easy, it's an extremely generous 10 seconds of parry time. However, in Final Horizon's original release, easy mode gave 1 second wiggle room to parry, and hard mode gave a paltry 8 frames. For context, and epilepsy warning, here's what 8 frames looks like at 60 frames per second. Did you miss it? Now, even if that was twice as long, do you think you could time that to right before an enemy attacks you? Here's the thing. Even on hard mode, the parries aren't the biggest issue. They're brutal and unfair, but I was able to get it decently enough to take down 1 or 2 titans. The problem is, on hard or even normal, you have to take down all 3 titans with exactly 400 rings, draining 1 ring every second. And I feel like you could calculate exactly how impossible that is. If you want to do this challenge on hard mode, you'd have to know the precise minutiae of Sonic's attacks, how to get the most DPS at once and skip certain phases and be able to perfect parry every single attack first try. And I'm sorry, but I did not come to this game to memorize attack patterns, I came here for fun. So yeah, I switched down to easy for this trial, and I'm not ashamed. And then after that trial is completed, we are given a few options: continue exploring the overworld and completing objectives, switch to one of the other playable characters for a bit, or take on our final challenge. The final boss of Another Story is brutal and poorly explained. I switched down to normal difficulty once the fight began, and I had to use the Sonic Wiki Zone to figure out how to actually beat it. I won't spoil too much more beyond that, other than to say it's so much more fun, climactic, and difficult than the original The End fight. And nobody dies! So that's always a plus. And that was Sonic Frontiers, and this is the second longest review I've made for this dumb series. So, what do I think of Sonic Frontiers overall? Holy shit, I love this game! Sonic Frontiers is undeniably the biggest game in the Sonic series, and it is incredible. The controls feel great, the level design is killer, it looks beautiful, fuck you, yes it does, and my god, this soundtrack? The writing is fucking amazing, the way this game blends new and old is stunning, the fucking open zone gameplay is immaculate, and the best part of all of this is just how hopeful it makes me for the series' future. I played this game at the start of September 2024, and as of writing the script, it is the latest Sonic game released to be solely developed by Sonic Team. And not only is this game so great on its own, but it shows off so much potential for what future Sonic games could possibly be. After so many years where Sonic and Sonic Team alike were thought of as laughingstocks, this game makes me think the series could reach the kind of heights we've never seen before. just one last sentimental thing, then I'll end this, alright? If you beat the game on hard mode, the final song that plays in the game is One Way Dream, with vocals by YouTube's own Nate Wants to Battle. That on its own is iconic, and the song has already become one of, if not my favorite songs in the entire series. Yes, this soundtrack beats Adventure 2. I'm sorry, it's just true. But in November 2022, composer Tomoya Atani gave an interview about the game's soundtrack to Sonic City. As one of the last answers he gave, he revealed that One Way Dream actually contained a message from the Sonic team. Now, technically we don't know what part of the song is that message he was talking about, but if the editing here is correct, I'd be willing to bet it's this.
They said we break. They said we lose. But here we are. What else is new? Stronger with every fall. Faster with every mile. You and me, we're built on trust. That's why we can always get up. Even if they left, we'll never bite the dust.
Alright, that's the second to last game for this marathon done. Next week's review probably is going to be a lot shorter and a lot less gushy. Personally, I think of it as more of a bonus review, like a coda to this big climactic finale. Not that I'm not still going to put in the effort to make it a good review, of course, wouldn't dream of it. So, I guess I'll see you all there. Peace.